Elena settled into her private cabin aboard the diplomatic vessel Concordia *, the holographic invitation still playing in her mind. The ship hummed softly as it accelerated beyond Earth's orbit, heading toward the designated rendezvous point where a council escort would meet them. "Ambassador, the briefing materials you requested," Marcus said, entering with a data tablet. The young aide's enthusiasm was evident in his hurried movements. This was his first diplomatic mission beyond human space. "Thank you, Marcus." Elena accepted the tablet, her expression revealing nothing of her inner calculations. Has Admiral Chen finished his security assessment? "Yes, ma'am. He's requesting a meeting before we reach the jump point." Elena nodded, scrolling through the data on 17 previous Council Vraxian negotiations. Each ended with Council concessions, followed inevitably by Vraxian violations within months. The pattern was so obvious that its continued repetition defied logic. Unless, of course, the Council preferred appeasement to confrontation. "Did you know," she said, not looking up, "that human settlements on Proxima Centauri II requested Council protection 8 years ago? They documented Vraxian scout ships conducting resource surveys in their system." Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I read the briefing, ma'am." The Council declined intervention, citing insufficient evidence. "Insufficient evidence," Elena repeated softly. 3 months later, Vraxian harvesters stripped the colony's outer moons of rare minerals. 1,426 colonists died when life support systems failed during the extraction process. The room fell silent except for the ship's gentle background hum. Elena finally looked up from her tablet, her dark eyes meeting Marcus's. The Council called it a tragic industrial accident. They accepted Vraxian reparations, half of what was promised, and considered the matter closed. She set the tablet down carefully. "Now they need us." "Do you think this invitation is sincere?" Marcus asked. Elena's lips curved in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, it's sincere. The Vraxians have never pushed this close to Council core worlds before. They're genuinely frightened." She rose, smoothing her formal diplomatic uniform. "Bring Admiral Chen to the strategy room. We have much to discuss before we arrive." The Concordia's strategy room was minimalist by design, a circular table surrounded by comfortable chairs, walls capable of displaying any information needed. Admiral Chen was already waiting when Elena entered, his military posture a stark contrast to the diplomatic staff's more relaxed bearing. "Ambassador," he greeted her with a respectful nod. At 62, Chen had commanded human defense forces during 3 Vraxian incursions into human space. Each time, his innovative tactics had forced the crystalline beings to retreat, achievements the Council had dismissed as provocative actions. "Our intelligence reports confirm Vraxian fleet movements consistent with preparation for a major offensive," Chen said without preamble. "They're positioning resource extraction vessels behind their battle groups." Elena sat at the table, gesturing for others to join. "They're not planning to occupy Council worlds," she concluded. "They're planning to harvest them." "Precisely." Chen activated the room's display system, showing Vraxian fleet positions. "The Council doesn't understand because they've never fought a resource war. Their member species evolved in systems of abundance." "But humans know scarcity," Marcus observed quietly. Elena nodded, studying the tactical display. "We understand fighting for survival." She tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the table's surface. "That understanding is why they've invited us now, though they'd never admit it." The meeting continued for hours as they analysed every aspect of the coming negotiations. Elena's team developed multiple strategies, anticipating Council resistance and Vraxian deception. As the Concordia approached the jump point, Elena stood by the observation window, watching the stars blur. "We'll listen," she murmured to herself. "We'll observe. And then we'll show them what humanity has learned from thousands of years of conflict and resolution." She turned as Marcus approached with final briefing updates. "Are you ready, Ambassador?" he asked. "Yes," she replied with quiet certainty, "for whatever awaits us at Nexus Station." Elena maintained her diplomatic composure as the Celdran counselor led them through Nexus Station's winding corridors toward their quarters. The blue-scaled alien moved with the fluid grace characteristic of his aquatic species, occasionally pausing to explain station features in the same slow, deliberate tone one might use with small children. "This passageway connects to the environmental regulation sector," the Zeldran explained, gesturing with a webbed hand. "Should you experience discomfort with the atmospheric settings in your quarters, please refrain from adjustments. Submit a formal request through proper channels." Admiral Chen caught Elena's eye, adding another mental tally to his growing list of subtle indignities. The message was clear. Humans weren't trusted to manage even basic environmental controls. Their assigned quarters were located in a remote section of the station's maintenance level. The narrow corridor smelled faintly of recycled air and processing chemicals. "Your accommodation area," the Celdran announced, motioning toward a series of small doors. "We have adjusted lighting to match Earth standard cycles. Your primitive circadian rhythms require such considerations, we understand." "How thoughtful," Elena replied, her voice betraying nothing of her thoughts. "We appreciate the Council's attention to detail." The rooms were converted utility spaces, functional but clearly not designed for diplomatic delegations. Each human would have a sleeping compartment barely large enough for a bed and small desk. The common area held a table with mismatched chairs and basic communication terminals. Marcus whispered to Chen, "The Moruvian delegation has a suite overlooking the station's central garden. I saw it on our way in." Chen nodded almost imperceptibly. "Document everything," he murmured. "Locations, accommodations, access restrictions." That Celdran's scales shifted to a brighter blue, a sign of pride in their species. "Your orientation session begins in 1 standard hour. I will return to escort you. Please remain in your assigned area until then." With a slight bow that somehow managed to convey condescension, the alien departed. Once alone, Elena gathered her team in the cramped common area. "First impressions?" she asked. "They've isolated us physically from other delegations," Chen observed. "Limited our movement and access. Standard containment protocol for potentially disruptive elements." Dr. Sanjay Mehta, the delegation's denopsychologist, nodded in agreement. "Classic in-group/out-group dynamics. They've positioned us as outsiders to reinforce their collective identity. The station's physical architecture mirrors their social hierarchy." Elena listened, taking in her team's observations. "And the Vraxians? Any sign of their delegation?" "Their vessel docked at the station's primary diplomatic bay," Marcus reported, checking his data pad. "They've been assigned the entire eastern wing of the ambassadorial level." "Of course," Elena murmured. She moved to the room's small viewport, gazing out at the swirling energies of the neutron star that powered the station. "They fear the Vraxians, but respect their power. They fear us and mistake our restraint for weakness." The team fell silent, contemplating her words. After a moment, Elena turned back to them, her expression resolute. "We will attend their orientation. We will follow their protocols. We will be the model of cooperation. Her eyes hardened slightly. And we will document every inconsistency, every double standard, every piece of information they think we're too primitive to understand. Chen smiled thinly. They expect us to behave like frustrated warriors denied respect. Then we shall disappoint them, Elena replied. For now we are students, observing, learning, and gathering intelligence. She glanced at her watch. We have 47 minutes before the Seldron returns. I want preliminary security assessments of our location, communication protocols, and potential surveillance. As her team dispersed to their tasks, Elena accessed a small terminal in the corner, requesting the full historical database of previous negotiations. The terminal flashed briefly before displaying request processing. Estimated wait time, 72 hours. She smiled faintly. The first test had been set. Now they would see just how determined humans could be. The negotiation chamber's curved walls displayed real-time imagery of affected worlds, a calculated reminder of what was at stake. Elena watched from humanity's corner position as another council representative surrendered mining rights to the Aldebaran system in exchange for a Vraxian promise of non-aggression. The chamber's soft lighting caught the subtle color shifts rippling through the lead Vraxian negotiator's crystalline form, transitions from commanding purple to satisfied blue that none of the council members seemed to notice or understand. After 3 days of meticulous observation, Elena had compiled a detailed log of these color shifts, correlating them with specific negotiation outcomes. Dr. Mehta confirmed her suspicions. The colors were emotional tells, involuntary expressions of the Vraxian collective consciousness. Ambassador Reyes, the council moderator, finally acknowledged, the human delegation has requested time to address the assembly. You have 2 minutes. Elena felt the collective attention shift toward her as she approached the central podium. The council members' expressions ranged from polite disinterest to barely concealed impatience. The Vraxian delegation's crystalline forms stilled, their usual internal light patterns momentarily suspended. Thank you, moderator. Elena began, her voice steady and measured. I have reviewed the complete records of all 17 previous peace negotiations between the Council and the Vraxian Empire. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Few had expected the humans to gain access to those records so quickly. The information request that should have taken 72 hours had been fulfilled in 18, thanks to Admiral Chen identifying an administrative override used by maintenance personnel. My analysis reveals a concerning pattern. Elena continued, activating the podium's display system. A timeline appeared, showing the 17 previous agreements and their subsequent violations. Each agreement was breached within a statistically consistent time frame of 30 standard days, with a variance of only 2.4%. The display highlighted the correlation with clinical precision. Several council members leaned forward, their attention caught despite themselves. My question is simple, Elena said, looking directly at the lead Vraxian negotiator. What empirical evidence suggests this 18th agreement will differ from the previous 17? Absolute silence descended upon the chamber. The lead Vraxian's crystalline structure pulsed with sudden vibrant red, a color Elena had never observed before quickly stabilizing to a neutral violet. The human displays typical aggressive paranoia. The Vraxian harmonized, his multi-toned voice resonating throughout the chamber. Past agreements were necessarily adjusted due to evolving circumstances. The Council understands the complex nature of interstellar diplomacy, unlike species focused on binary conflict paradigms. Several Council members nodded in agreement, but Elena noticed others exchanging troubled glances. The Moruvian representative's tentacles curled inward, a gesture Dr. Meta had identified as indicating deep thought or concern. The moderator cleared his throat. "Thank you, Ambassador Reyes. Your time has concluded." Elena returned to her seat, ignoring the dismissive whispers from several delegations. What mattered was that she had planted a seed of doubt. The data spoke for itself to anyone willing to listen. Later that night, in their cramped quarters, Elena and her team worked tirelessly. Admiral Chen had configured their holographic projector to display Vraxian fleet movements across 50 years of supposed peacetime. The three-dimensional model revealed patterns invisible when examining isolated incidents. There, Chen pointed to a sequence of fleet redeployments following the 9th Peace Agreement. They pulled back their primary battle groups from the negotiated buffer zone, but simultaneously positioned resource extraction vessels just beyond sensor range. Dr. Meta studied the pattern. It's consistent with their behavior during the Proxima Centauri incident. Elena nodded, watching as the holographic display revealed a choreographed dance of strategic repositioning. They create the illusion of compliance while preparing for the next phase of resource acquisition. The Council doesn't see it, Marcus observed, because they want to believe in the possibility of peaceful coexistence. No, Elena corrected gently. They don't see it because they've never had to fight for survival. They've never experienced existential threat. She magnified a section of the display showing current Vraxian fleet positions near Council core worlds, but they're about to. The Council chamber doors closed behind the human delegation with a definitive thud. In the corridor outside, Elena maintained her measured pace, neither hurried nor hesitant. Her team fell into step beside her, their coordinated movement the result of countless diplomatic missions. None spoke until they reached a secure area 3 levels below. In an unused maintenance hub, Admiral Chen had swept for surveillance devices. "Well, that went exactly as predicted," Chen remarked dryly, breaking the silence. Elena allowed herself a small sigh, the first crack in her diplomatic facade. Phase 1 complete. They reacted precisely as our psychological models anticipated. Dr. Meta nodded, reviewing notes on his tablet. The Zephyrian High Councillor's contempt was particularly illuminating. 6 eyes blinking in sequence indicates extreme agitation in their species. He genuinely believes humans are primitive warmongers. What matters is that several council members showed doubt, Elena said. I counted 7 species whose physiological responses suggested concern rather than dismissal. Marcus pulled up the station's layout on the wall display. Security protocols have already been adjusted. Our access to common areas has been restricted, and surveillance on our quarters has increased. Good, Elena replied, surprising the young aide. Their predictability makes our next moves easier. Chen activated a secure communication device. The Concordia's systems are prepared for silent undocking if necessary. Captain Rivera reports all systems nominal. What about the data we extracted from the Council archives? Elena asked. Already transmitted to Earth and secured in 3 independent systems, Marcus confirmed. The historical evidence of Vraxian deception can never be erased now, regardless of what happens here. Elena nodded with satisfaction. Now comes the critical phase. Our apparent withdrawal must appear emotional and impulsive to outside observers, while being precisely calculated to achieve maximum impact. Dr. Meta consulted his cultural analysis. The station's rumor networks are already active. The Vril ambassadors at Tesh inquired whether humans might resort to violence after such humiliation. Perfect, Elena said, Let them wonder. Uncertainty is our ally now. Admiral Chen's expression remained serious. The Vraxians will accelerate their timeline. Our intelligence suggests their harvest fleet is already positioned near the Arcturus defense line. How long before they make their move? Elena asked. Based on previous patterns, 3 to 4 days maximum, Chen replied. They'll use the Council's distraction with our departure to push for immediate demilitarization of key defensive positions. Elena turned to Marcus. You'll handle the communication protocols. One message, repeated whenever they attempt contact. The human delegation is preparing for departure. Nothing more. They'll assume we're sulking, Marcus said with a slight smile. While we're actually implementing the next phase of our strategy, Elena confirmed. They believe we've abandoned the negotiations because our pride was wounded. This misconception gives us the freedom to maneuver. Dr. Mehta cleared his throat. There is one potential variable we haven't fully accounted for: direct outreach from individual council members. Elena considered this. Some may try to approach us unofficially. If they do, assess their sincerity but reveal nothing of our plans. She turned to Admiral Chen. Begin transferring our essential equipment to the Concordia. Make it visible enough to be noticed, but not so obvious as to reveal our true timeline. And if the Council formally requests our return to negotiations? Marcus asked. Elena's expression hardened slightly. They won't. Their cultural paradigm prevents them from acknowledging error until catastrophic evidence forces the issue. She glanced at the station schematics. And by my calculation, that evidence is approximately 72 hours away. The team dispersed to their assignments, moving with the quiet efficiency that had become their hallmark. As Elena made her way back toward their quarters, she noticed station personnel watching her with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Let them wonder, she thought. Sometimes the most powerful diplomatic message was silence. Young Zorax moved through Nexus Station's service corridors with practiced ease. As a junior Trilaxian aide, he had memorized the station's maintenance pathways during his first week, knowledge that now served a purpose beyond efficient message delivery. His curiosity about the humans had only intensified since their dramatic departure from negotiations. The station buzzed with theories. In the diplomatic lounge, the insectoid Vril ambassador had chittered anxiously about human psychic weapons. They can project rage thoughts across vast distances, she had claimed. My great-grandmother's hive witnessed such attacks during the Orion conflict. Meanwhile, the philosophical Moruvians had organized a 12-hour debate on whether humanity's emotional architecture represented an evolutionary advantage or disadvantage in interstellar relations. Neither group had thought to simply ask the humans directly. Zorax paused at an intersection, checking his surroundings before proceeding toward the sealed human quarters. His third heart fluttered nervously. Approaching the humans without authorization violated at least 7 diplomatic protocols, enough to end his promising career. Yet the memory of his ancestor, whose life had been saved by human medical officers on a distant colony world, compelled him forward. The corridor outside the human quarters appeared empty, but Zorax noted the subtle shimmer of enhanced surveillance fields. He approached the entrance and pressed the communication panel. Junior diplomatic aide Zorax, requesting audience with Ambassador Reyes, he announced, his triple-toned voice steadier than he felt. To his surprise, the door opened almost immediately. The human aide, Marcus, he recalled, stood in the entrance, expression neutral but evaluating. The ambassador is available, Marcus said simply, stepping aside. Zorax entered cautiously, his three-lobed brain processing multiple observations simultaneously. The human quarters were transformed. Gone was any sign of diplomatic residence. Equipment was organized in efficient transport configurations. Workstations displayed complex data patterns that rearranged themselves continuously. The humans moved with synchronized purpose, their earlier diplomatic formality replaced by focused efficiency. In the center of this activity stood Ambassador Reyes, reviewing information on multiple screens. She turned to Zorax with the same measured calm she had shown in the council chamber. "Aid Zorax," she acknowledged. "What brings you to our quarters uninvited?" Zorax's neck frills fluttered with nervous energy. "Ambassador, the station speaks of nothing but your delegation's actions. Some say you prepare for war. Others claim you abandon the galactic community entirely." He hesitated before adding, "I wish to see the truth for myself." Elena studied him briefly. "And what truth do you see?" Zorax looked around at the methodical preparations. "Not chaos, not emotion. You are not." He searched for the right word. "Sulking, as many believe." A hint of appreciation flickered in Elena's eyes. Perspective often depends on whether one observes with eyes or with cultural assumptions. "The Council continues negotiations," Zorax offered. "The Vraxians demand immediate demilitarization of the Arcturus defense line. A vote is scheduled for tomorrow." Elena nodded as if this merely confirmed her expectations. "And the Council will agree, despite our warning. They believe the Vraxians offer genuine peace." Zorax's middle heart constricted with doubt. "Is that not possible?" Elena regarded him with eyes that seemed ancient beyond her biological years. "We've seen this pattern before in our history," she told him quietly. "Sometimes walking away from a table is the only message certain entities understand." The calm certainty in her voice sent a chill through Zorax's thermal regulation system. He suddenly perceived the humans not as emotional primitives, but as something far more disquieting, strategists operating with a different understanding of conflict and resolution than any council species possessed. "What will happen next?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Return to your delegation, Zorax," Elena advised, "and perhaps suggest they review humanity's historical archives on the concepts of strategic withdrawal and tactical patience." As Zorax departed, his three minds processed a troubling realization. The humans hadn't left the negotiations. They had simply moved them to a different board with different rules they understood better than anyone else. The council president clutched the small data crystal in her trembling hand as she raced through Nexus Station's emergency evacuation protocols. Her ornate presidential robes, symbols of authority and wisdom, now seemed like foolish vanity as evacuation alarms blared throughout the station. The Vraxian warships had emerged precisely where Ambassador Reyes had predicted, their harvest vessels already deploying toward defenseless worlds. "Madam President, we must reach the secure bunker," our security chief urged, a Thraxi whose exoskeleton clicked anxiously with each movement. "No," she replied with sudden resolve. "Prepare my personal shuttle." The security team exchanged alarmed glances. "The human coordinates?" the chief asked. She nodded, slipping the crystal into a secure pocket. Decades of political maneuvering had honed her instincts for survival, and those instincts now pointed clearly toward the departing human vessel. The station's viewports showed the elegant Concordia undocking with precise movements, its engines glowing with pre-jump energy. Her shuttle launched minutes later, navigation systems locked onto the human ship's position. The Concordia's pilot acknowledged her approach with professional courtesy, but made no move to slow their departure. Ambassador Reyes, she transmitted, setting aside protocol and formality. The Council requires immediate assistance. The response was delayed exactly 12 seconds, long enough to convey deliberate consideration rather than eagerness. Madam President, Elena's voice came through with perfect clarity. The Vraxian attack pattern matches our projections to within 3.2%. Their harvest vessels are deploying toward Moruvian and Zephyrian worlds first, likely targeting biochemical compounds essential to Vraxian crystalline metabolism. You knew this would happen, the President stated, anger briefly overcoming her desperation. We attempted to prevent it, Elena corrected calmly. Our analysis was dismissed as primitive warmongering. The shuttle's sensors detected massive energy discharges as Vraxian weapons targeted the Arcturus defense line. Defenses that would have held if not for the Council's vote just hours earlier. We were wrong, the President admitted, the words unfamiliar on her tongue after centuries in politics. The Council was wrong about humanity. Please help us. Through the communication screen, she saw Elena exchange glances with Admiral Chen. Something unspoken passed between them. A decision reached through the subtlest of signals. We offered partnership and received condescension. Elena finally responded, her voice neither triumphant nor angry, but carrying a weight of disappointment mixed with resolve. Now we must protect our systems as we've always done. The President's heart sank. After all that had happened, the humans would abandon them to their fate. She couldn't blame them, yet the thought of returning to our people empty-handed was unbearable. Then Elena leaned forward slightly. However, she continued, if representatives with decision-making authority wish to discuss actual resistance rather than surrender, we will wait at these coordinates for 48 hours. The data crystal in the President's pocket suddenly felt heavier, more significant. As the human ship prepared for jump, Elena transmitted one final message. Bring only those willing to acknowledge reality and act accordingly. This meeting is not for those seeking symbolic gestures or further negotiations with the Vraxians. The Concordia vanished into hyperspace, leaving the President staring at the coordinates projected on her shuttle's navigation system. Behind her, Nexus Station shimmered with emergency force fields as the first Vraxian probes tested its defenses. For the first time in her 300-year political career, the Council President faced a choice between pride and survival. The station's communication system chimed with incoming emergency transmissions from Council worlds under attack. Decision made, she turned to her pilot. Set course for these coordinates, she ordered, and send encrypted messages to representatives of all Council species. Tell them, she paused, the unfamiliar taste of humility bitter on her tongue, tell them the humans were right. The abandoned mining facility's central chamber fell silent as Elena concluded her briefing. Holographic displays cast an eerie blue light across the faces of the assembled representatives, 34 species, each coming to terms with the devastating reality of the Vraxian threat. The Moruvian delegate's grief was palpable, her normally vibrant tentacles hanging limply as she processed footage of her homeworld's oceans being systematically extracted. 4 billion Moruvians, she whispered, her translator struggling to convey the depth of her anguish. Our southern continental shelf, gone. 7,000 years of aquatic architecture, harvested in hours. Admiral Chen stepped forward, directing attention back to the tactical analysis. Their resource extraction follows a predictable pattern, he explained, highlighting movement paths across the star chart. The Vraxians target specific biochemical compounds first, then geological formations containing rare minerals. They aren't conquerors, they are harvesters. Why? asked the Zephyrian representative, his earlier condescension replaced by genuine confusion. Their empire spans 17 sectors. Surely they have sufficient resources. Elena nodded to Dr. Mehta, who activated a new display showing environmental readings from deep within Vraxian territory. Data gathered by stealth probes that had cost 3 human scouts their lives to deploy. Their home system is dying, Mehta explained. Spectral analysis shows catastrophic environmental collapse. Their star's unusual radiation patterns are degrading the crystalline structures that comprise both their bodies and technology. They're not expanding by choice, but out of desperation. Understanding dawned across the diverse faces of the assembly. The Vril representative's compound eyes reflected the holographic data as she processed its implications. They seek specific resources to sustain their crystalline biology. She chittered, mandibles clicking in agitation. Not territory, but survival. Precisely, Chen confirmed. And this desperation creates exploitable vulnerabilities in their strategy. He expanded the tactical display, highlighting Vraxian attack patterns across multiple engagements. Their collective consciousness makes them formidable, but also predictable. Their fleet movements follow mathematical progressions with minimal deviation. They think as one mind, which makes them coordinated but inflexible. Elena watched as the Council representatives began. Elena stood before the emergency session of the Galactic Council, the chamber vastly different from 6 weeks earlier. Gone were the ornate decorations and ceremonial seating arrangements. The room now hummed with practical energy, tactical displays, communication arrays, and representatives who had traded formal attire for functional uniforms. On the massive central display, the battle at Centaur Nexus unfolded in real time, human vessels moving in seemingly random patterns alongside Council ships. The Vraxian flagship has initiated contact, announced the Zephyrian communications officer, his 6 eyes blinking in rapid sequence. They're requesting terms of surrender. A murmur rippled through the chamber. Victory had seemed impossible mere weeks ago.